Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
Good afternoon, good people. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown, and this is Thrive Thursday. Yes, we are one day removed from the weekend, and I thank you for joining me here on the Afternoon Praise again. We are here to help you reach your defined level of success by discovering and developing your gifts. And this week, we have been talking about culture. Monday, we established what you allow becomes your culture. Tuesday, we exposed red flags don't fix themselves. Yesterday, we dealt with healthy things cannot grow in toxic environments. But today, we are going deeper because many people believe growth will solve dysfunction. They think more money, more visibility, more followers, more opportunity, more staff, more influence will somehow fix what's internally unstable. But growth does not fix dysfunction. Growth exposes it. Because expansion magnifies what already exists. If communication is weak now, growth will make it weaker. If leadership is emotionally unstable now, growth will amplify it. If systems are chaotic now, growth creates larger chaos. That's why today's message is dangerous. You cannot scale dysfunction. That's what we are talking about today. Let me repeat that. You cannot scale dysfunction. Let's look at Luke 6, verse 48 and 49. He is like a man which built an house and dig deep and laid the foundation on a rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently upon the house and could not shake it, for it was founded upon a rock. But he that heareth and doeth not is like a man that without a foundation built an house upon the earth, against which the stream did beat vehemently, and immediately it fell. And the ruin of that house was great. The storm did not create the weakness, people. The storm revealed the foundation. And some people are trying to scale brands, businesses, ministries, leaderships, influence without building the structure necessary to survive pressure. Because eventually growth tests everything underneath the surface. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Join us on this heavenly journey, one song at a time, Wave Radio.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown, and today is Thrive Thursday, and we are talking about you cannot scale dysfunction. Excuse me. Growth amplifies what's already exists. One of the greatest myths in leadership is believing growth automatically fixes problems. It doesn't. It exposes them. Growth is not a filter. Growth is a magnifier. If your systems are weak now, growth creates more pressure on weak systems. If communication is unhealthy now, growth multiplies confusion. If trust is unstable now, growth increases emotional fragmentation. That's why many organizations collapse during expansion, because the infrastructure was never strong enough to support the weight of growth. People celebrate visibility without asking if the structure can survive the pressure visibility creates. Growth reveals what preparation concealed. Pressure exposes what comfort was hiding. The bigger the opportunity becomes, the harder weak foundations shake.
You're riding the waves of faith and grace on Wave Radio.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise on this Thrive Thursday. It is raining here in Durham, North Carolina, but it's still a beautiful day because God woke me up. He opened my eyes. My blood is flowing. So I don't care if it's raining, it's storming, it's still a beautiful day. And I hope that you feel the same way too. But today we are talking about you cannot scale dysfunction. So you cannot scale chaos. Some people are trying to scale businesses, brands, ministries, leaderships, and their platforms while still operating in chaos. No structure, no systems, no emotional regulations, no consistency, no accountability, and eventually dysfunction scales too. Because chaos does not become organized simply because you grow faster. Actually, speed often makes dysfunction more dangerous. That's why rapid growth destroys some people. Because growth increased pressure on systems that were already unstable. What is weak in private eventually becomes visible in public. Growth without order creates large confusion. You cannot build stability on top of instability. Chaos becomes expensive once more people are affected by it. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Stay tuned and stay blessed here on Wave Radio.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise here on Wave Radio. Remember, share Wave Radio with someone, your family and friends. And again, I want to thank you because, earlier today, my Instagram page, but my YouTube page has grown. It has grown. So I thank you for supporting me. And again, without you, there's no me. So let's continue to support each other. And today we're talking about you cannot scale dysfunction. But let's talk about burnout. Burnout is often structural. This is important, people. Many people think burnout is caused only by working hard. But burnout is often structural. People burn out when they constantly have to fight broken systems, navigate confusion, survive poor communication, manage emotional instability, and compensate for lack of leadership. That's exhausting. See, Gemini's research said something powerful. See, I do research before I do these shows, right? So Gemini's research says something powerful. People burn out when they have to fight the systems to do their job. That's deep. And not just in business, not just at work, at home in your families. People burn out when they have to fight the systems to do their job. Meaning the problem is not always effort. Sometimes the infrastructure itself is draining people emotionally. Confusion drains energy faster than hard work. Emotionally unhealthy systems silently exhaust people over time. Many people are not tired from purpose, they are tired from dysfunction. Let me repeat that. Many people are not tired from purpose, they are tired from dysfunction. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Stay tuned and stay blessed here on Wave Radio.
Thank you for joining me on this Thursday, this Thrive Thursday here on the Afternoon Praise. If you have a shout out, song request, keep them coming. Keep on coming. I know you enjoy probably hearing your name, hearing your friend's name, or probably hearing the song. Hey, I requested that. Man, they playing it. Yeah, that's what we do. So continue to do that. All right. Today, we're talking about you cannot scale dysfunction. Let's talk about emotional instability scales too. Yes, the good and the bad, both sides scales, but they scale differently. One scale add, multiply, the other scale, it takes away. See, a leader's emotional state affects the room. Research around stress shows leadership emotions spread through organizations. That means emotional instability scales, fear scales, inconsistency scales, tension scales. If leaders cannot regulate themselves emotionally, eventually the room starts managing moods instead of managing missions. And that's dangerous. Now, communication weakens, trust weakens, creativity weakens, emotional safety weakens, and eventually the culture becomes emotionally exhausted. Because people cannot thrive in environments where emotions are unpredictable. Emotionally unstable leadership creates emotionally unstable environments. When leaders lack peace internally, pressure spreads externally. The emotional climate of leadership eventually becomes the emotional climate of the culture. We got to get our internal selves in order so that our external environment can thrive and grow and be strong. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Stay tuned and stay blessed here on Wave Radio.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. Let's talk about internal dysfunction eventually leaks externally. Yes. See, you cannot separate internal dysfunctions from external leadership forever. Eventually, pressure exposes character. Growth exposes weaknesses. Visibility exposes instability. That's why some people build public success while privately collapsing emotionally. And eventually, the internal disorder leaks outwards. You've seen the news. When people go through something, they're committing suicide, or people supposed to be this, but they end up being something else. They go to jail, things happen. And eventually the internal disorder leaks outwards through communication, through reactions, through leadership behavior, through broken relationships, through poor decision making. This lines from the research is powerful. If your private life is a wreck, your public platform is a ticking time bomb. That's heavy truth, people, because platforms amplify people. They do not heal them. Success cannot permanently hide internal instability. What is unsolved internally eventually appears operationally. Private disorder eventually becomes public dysfunction. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Stay tuned and stay blessed here on Wave Radio.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise here on Wave Radio, WAYVVE Radio. Make sure you share the website, share the radio station with someone. Let's talk about weak foundations create fragile success. See, some people are building fast, but not building strong. The fast growth without healthy foundations creates fragile success. Because weak systems collapse under pressure. Weak communication collapse under pressure. Weak leadership collapse under pressure. Weak emotional governance collapse under pressure. That's why wisdom matters. Healthy growth requires structure, discipline, accountability, systems, communication, and emotional maturity. Without those things, growth becomes dangerous. Speed without structure creates what? Instability, people. A larger platform only increases pressure on weak areas. What is not built correctly eventually breaks publicly. And we've been seeing this over the years in church, in businesses, in families. We got to work on our internal structures. We have to build systems that support growth and accountability. We're not going to always get everything right, but we have to have someone that's keeping us accountable so that we can line back up in order. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Bringing the sounds of heaven 24/7, Wave Radio.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. This is Thrive Thursday, and we are talking about you cannot scale dysfunction. Communication dies first. When organization scales without structure, the first thing to die is clarity. People stop knowing expectations. They stop knowing the directions. They stop knowing the responsibility. They stop knowing priorities. Now confusion spreads. Different departments build different visions. Different people move with different assumptions. And eventually fragmentation begins. That's why communication must be architected during growth. Healthy systems intentionally creates clarity. Listen to what I'm saying. Healthy systems, listen to this word right here, intentionally creates clarity. Because confusion eventually becomes expensive. Misalignment grows quickly when communication is inconsistent. Clarity protects culture from fragmentation. When communication is weakens, trust eventually weakens too. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown. Let's talk about the heroic effect does not scale. Some leaders build organizations through heroic efforts, working constantly, saving everything personally, fixing every fire manually. But heroism does not scale. Systems do. And at some point, exhaustion increases, pressure increases, mistakes increases, emotional fatigue increases. And eventually the leaders become the bottleneck. That's why leadership must evolve from doing everything to building systems that sustain growth. Because if everything depends on one person, the organization is fragile. Consistent rescue mode eventually destroys sustainability. Leaders who refuse to delegate eventually limit growth. Healthy systems reduce dependency on emotional heroism. All right, stop trying to be a hero.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown. Let's talk about fear-based leadership creates silence. Google Project Aristotle found that psychological safety was the number one predictor of high-performing teams. People perform differently when they feel safe. But fear-based leadership creates silence. Now people stop asking questions, reporting mistakes, challenging ideas, communicating honestly, because survival mode replaces innovation. And once people become afraid of leadership, trust stops flowing upwards. That's dangerous. Because organizations collapse when problems stop being reported honestly. Fear suppresses communication before it destroys performance. Silence becomes expensive when people no longer feel safe telling the truth. Healthy leadership creates safety for honesty, correction, and growth. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise, and this is Thrive Thursday, and we are talking about you cannot scale dysfunction. Your systems reveal your leadership. People often judge leadership by charisma, but systems reveal leadership more accurately than speeches. Your system exposes your discipline, your priorities, your communication, your consistency, and your emotional governance. Because systems are visible leadership. Chaos grows when structure is absent. This means if confusion dominates your environment, the systems are speaking. If burnout dominates your environment, the systems are speaking. If distrust dominates your environment, the systems are speaking. Eventually, systems reveal what leadership has been tolerating all along. Leadership is not proven by inspiration alone. It is proven by stability and sustainability. Strong systems protect people from unnecessary chaos. Your systems eventually preach louder than your words. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown, on this Thrive Thursday. Hey, how you doing, man? We are one day away, removed from the weekend. I hope and I pray that you are finishing strong. You are still going strong. Your foot is still pressed on the gas, and you are getting to whatever it was you said you were going to accomplish this week. And I celebrate you ahead of time. All right? Check this out. Unresolved trauma can become organizational culture. I'm going to say that again. Unresolved trauma can become organizational culture. This is where the conversations get uncomfortable. Your leaders are trying to scale externally while internally they are still broken emotionally. Now, unresolved trauma starts leaking into leadership. People who were never healed lead defensive, communicate defensive, react defensive, correct defensive, trust defensive. Now, disagreements feels personal. Correction feels like disrespect. Accountability feels like attack. Pressure creates emotional overreaction. And eventually, the dysfunction spreads through the culture. Because emotionally wounded leadership eventually creates emotionally exhausted environments. You cannot build healthy cultures from unhealed internal foundations. Unhealed leaders often create emotionally unsafe environments unintentionally. Pain that is not processed eventually affects leadership's behavior. Internal instability eventually becomes cultural instability. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise, and this is Thrive Thursday. Let's talk about the Founder's Trap. And you know, I bring this up every week because I want to make sure you're getting it, you're hearing it. Many organizations stop growing because leadership refuses to evolve. This is called the Founder's Trap. The organization grows, but the leader still tries to control everything personally. Now, micromanagement increases, trust decreases, delegation weakens, development slows, talent leaves. That's the process. Because the leader scaled the work, but never scaled the leadership. And eventually, growth creates pressure the leaders emotionally cannot handle. That's why leadership maturity matters, because organizations rarely outgrow the emotional capacity of leadership. Control issues eventually create organizational bottlenecks. Micromanagement suffocates creativity and development. Growth requires leadership to evolve emotionally, strategically, and operationally. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. And if you miss any of this show, you can go to my YouTube channel. It's the Business Point Guard, Demetrius L. Brown. And you can listen to any show that you missed. Or if you just want to go back and hear a show that you really enjoyed, or if you want to share it with someone. And today's show, we are talking about you cannot scale dysfunction. See, branding cannot hide dysfunction forever. Marketing can create visibility, but branding cannot permanently hide dysfunction. And at some point, culture becomes visible. Communication becomes visible. Instability becomes visible. Leadership weaknesses become visible. That's why some brands grow quickly, then collapse publicly. I like the sound effects. Because the external image became larger than the internal structure. The research said something powerful. Marketing can buy visibility, but only culture can buy longevity. That's a dangerous truth because eventually the external reality collides with the external image. And when that gap becomes too wide, the organization starts tearing itself apart emotionally. A polished brand cannot permanently hide broken systems. Visibility increases exposure to external weaknesses. Longevity, it sustains through healthy culture, not hype alone. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise, and this is Thrive Thursday. You remember last week we talking about the governance. See, what you fail to govern eventually governs you. This is one of the deepest leadership truths of the entire week. What you fail to govern eventually governs you. If you fail to govern emotions, communications, accountability, discipline, systems, and standards, eventually those things start governing the environment. Chaos governs the room. Inconsistency governs the room. Burnout governs the room. Emotional instability governs the room. That's why governance matter. Healthy leadership requires emotional governance, operational governance, communication governance, and personal people and personal governance. Because unmanaged dysfunction always grows. Disorder expands when leadership avoids difficult corrections. What leadership ignores eventually becomes normalized behavior. Governance protect environments from emotional and operational collapse. You got to govern yourself. You got to govern your environment. You got to govern your communication, your emotions. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise here on Wave Radio. Y'all hear that smack? I don't know why I do that, but I got to stop doing that because it irritates me every time I come on. I hope I'm not irritating you with that, but if I am, I do apologize. Well, let's talk about sustainable growth requires structure. See, everybody wants expansion, but very few people prepare structurally for expansion. Healthy growth requires what? Systems. I keep talking about this. Systems, clarity, discipline, accountability, communication, emotional maturity. Because sustainability growth must be supported properly. You cannot keep adding floors to a building with a cracked foundation. Eventually, pressure increases, the instability increases, confusion increases, emotional exhaustion increases. And what once looked successful start collapsing under its own weight. That's why wisdom builds slowly and intentionally. Because healthy structure protects long-term growth. Strong infrastructure creates sustainable momentum. Growth without preparation creates unnecessary pressure. Healthy environments are intentionally built, not accidentally discovered. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're tuned in to the Afternoon Praise here on Wave Radio, and this is Thrive Thursday. And my time is up. I thank you for joining me on this Thursday. But before I leave, let me leave you with this. Every wise woman buildeth her house, but the foolish plucketh it down with her hands. Some people are praying for expansions while ignoring dysfunction. Some people want bigger platforms, larger influence, more visibility, great opportunities, but they have not built the structure necessary to sustain it. And eventually, growth exposes what was already weak. Growth does not fix dysfunction. growth exposes it. Because expansion magnifies what's already exists. If the systems are broken, growth exposes it. If communication is unhealthy, growth exposes it. If leadership is emotionally unstable, guess what? Growth exposes it. If internal dysfunction remains unresolved, guess what? Growth exposes it. That's why healthy leadership requires governance. Because if you do not govern your emotions, your systems, your communication, your discipline, and your culture, eventually those things start governing you. And maybe the pressure you feel is not because growth is wrong. Maybe the foundation simply isn't strong enough yet for the weight you were trying to go. Yes, I didn't say weight. I said yet for the weight of where you're trying to go. Growth increases pressure on everything hidden underneath the surface. The blessing becomes dangerous when the structure is not prepared to contain it. Wisdom is not just building something successful. Wisdom is building something sustainable. And remember this, y'all. You cannot scale dysfunction. Eventually, chaos becomes visible, instability becomes expensive, emotional exhaustion becomes your culture, broken systems become public. So before asking for more expansion, make sure your structure can survive the weight of the blessing. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown, and I thank you for joining me on this Thrive Thursday. I will catch you tomorrow on Fearless Faith Friday. I'm out of here. Peace.
Stay tuned and stay blessed here on Wave Radio.